What is up, everybody? My name is Jack and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about common misconceptions in film. Now, we're not necessarily going to be talking about that whole thing where you're watching a movie with your parents and they think they see Channing Tatum on the screen, but it's actually Morgan Freeman.
It's a movie
Is that Channing Tatum?
No, it's Morgan Freeman.
Are you sure?
No, that's not what we're talking about here. What we are going to be talking about is sort of the stuff that gets to the nitty and gritty sort of side of film, the creative side, the production side. And that's going to be very specifically story versus plot and tracking versus zooming, what makes them different and why that's important. We're going to start with story versus plot. What makes these two terms common misconceptions is purely that people use them interchangeably as synonyms, when they're really not. A story is just a general one sentence, sometimes longer descriptor of whatever's happening, whether that's in a movie, a video game, or a novel. Whereas the plot is a fleshed out version of that. You know everything you're getting, it tells you everything from point A to point B. When you're looking at like websites like IMDb or any other movie database, and they give you a description of what's happening, that's the plot description. That's not the story description. If it were the story description, you get like one sentence. Yeah, they're not the same thing. We're gonna illustrate this a little bit clearer with Alfred Hitchcock's iconic film, Psycho. Psycho's story is people are dying in the Bates Motel. That's it. That's the story of the film. People die in the Bates Motel. In the plot of the movie, people are being murdered in the Bates Motel by the owner, who has an identity disorder and thinks he's his mom, who's protecting his son from these people. There's your difference. The plot is much more fleshed out. The other thing that's interesting about the plot over the story is that the story has to stay generic. It has to stay that one sentence. The plot can be plotted out many different ways just from using this one sentence. As long as you use this one sentence, it can be different. So it's like people are being murdered in the Bates Motel. Okay, people are dying in the Bates Motel from this disease that it manifested in the motel. Or people are being murdered in the Bates Motel through a Saw-like game that they were thrust into. These are three radically different plots of three radically different movies that all have the same story. That's the big difference here. And that's what makes knowing what a story versus a plot is so important, because you don't want to mess that up. Now let's go ahead and let's move on to the difference between a track and a zoom. What makes this a common misconception is the fact that people just tend to use the term zoom to describe any sort of change in distance from the subject to the camera. Now, a zoom, the camera doesn't actually move. It changes its distance, its shot distance, based on focal length of the camera. So basically the camera doesn't move and you have this little lens on your camera that goes this way, and you kind of flip it that way. With tracking, that's when the camera actually moves. That's when you're physically moving the camera and you're getting what you need from it from actually grabbing the camera. This is often seen with like shaky cam and when people are walking in a direction and the person's like following backwards. Often that can also be dolly, which is a form of tracking where the camera is on like a track and it's just kind of moving one way or another. We have this clip from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World that's playing right here. That is Scott Pilgrim walking through a hallway. This is tracking. You'll notice that like the background, nothing's really changing. He's just sort of walking, things are kind of moving side to side, but nothing's really sort of being obstructed that normally wouldn't be obstructed in the shot. Now, there's this shot is where Scott is standing still, he's looking at a door, and if you see it zooming in on him. But if you can tell by the background, as it's moving in forward, things around him are moving and things are being obstructed that normally wouldn't be. That's your difference. You can tell generally by how the background changes or stays the same that you have a tracking versus a zoom. And that's really what it comes down to. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope this generally helped clear up some misconceptions. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Hotel Motel Holiday Inn.